Okay, so welcome to the Zoom conference through AACI and the Financial Resource Network. I think this is our third one of 2021. Interesting topic of savings and investments. Seems contradictory, but we'll be able to focus on both. So we're starting on time, and just welcome to everybody who hasn't been here before, and to those who have been to some of our other seminars, welcome back. I'm Yitzchak Hutner, and I'm your host for this evening. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself a bit later. What's important is that we first of all want to thank the AACI for making this evening possible. And we thank Leah Rosenzweig, who's doing the technical assistance for tonight's seminar. So thank you to AACI and thank you to Leah. So the structure of the evening tonight is going to be a little bit different than the other ones that we've had. We're going to cover many different areas. So in order to you be able to see the big picture, Mark Van Gelderen, Mark is going to cover some of the areas, and he's going to highlight some of the major highlights and pitfalls that we need to know about in terms of saving and investing. And then we're going to open it up to a broad range of questions from you and answers from our guest speakers tonight. So aside from Mark and myself, we're going to be joined this evening. We have three very highly accomplished experts in very diverse fields to be able to answer some of your questions, and more about them as we get started a bit later. I just want to mention to you that for all of you who are joining us now, if your questions are going to be critical, because we'll be able to put them to our speakers, and you'll be able to use the chat at the bottom of the screen to be able to put your questions to us. I'll look at the questions and I'll be able to put them to the appropriate people. So please feel free. Any questions that you have, go down to the chat, and I'll be able to direct it to our experts who will be willing to be able to answer your questions today. And if we don't get to be able to answer all your questions, then they've already agreed the speakers will be able to respond to your questions afterwards. And I'll be following up with each and every one of you in any event to make sure all your questions have been answered, and we'll follow up with you afterwards. Because we realize that some of the questions that you may have are private in nature, so we'll be able to follow up with you afterwards. Okay, so you can see the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and otherwise I think you're going to remain muted throughout the rest of the time, and then if there's time remaining at the end, we'll be able to open it up to further questions. So let's get started with Mark and his overview and his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Leah, if you can put up the slides that were sent to you for the presentation, and while you're getting them up, we'll go right to the first page, which are the topics we're going to cover this evening. And the main thing I wanted to do there is to make sure that we give you a couple of disclaimers. Do not make any decisions based on anything you hear tonight. We're not trying to sell you anything. These are overview topics. You're going to need more professional help from us or others before making final decisions. This is just to give you an idea of how things work, so that you're going into things better informed. Okay, let's go on to the next page and get started. One of the things that was most frustrating for me and the people working with me as we got started back in the 1990s doing these kind of seminars in Israel and trying to provide help is to go and find a simple way to manage money in Israel. So let's go on to page 2. And we have with us the person who helped us to put together the system, Moshe Jonas, and he'll be happy to answer more of your questions later on. But I'm going to just explain to you what we were trying to accomplish is that people should not have to spend a lot of time every month to pay their bills, to understand what is going on, to know how much money they're spending and so forth, and to get the system to work pretty much automatically at very low cost, much like most people organize their finances in the United States in particular, where everything can be done through one account and it's easy to keep track of things and to get things paid and to receive income all in the same account. So we put together with Moshe Jonas a money management system. Here is how it works. It's important to know at the beginning how much money you don't have in your account each month from pensions, Bituach Leumi, Social Security, or whatever it is, and how much you might need to be drawing from savings here or abroad. If you know approximately how much money you're short, it is easy to go and set up the system. It's worthwhile to bring in several years of that negative cash flow all at once because it will cost less to bring it here and it will be able to get a higher rate of savings income interest than if it was sitting in a bank in Israel, in America, or any place else. And with that extra level of income, it will pretty much pay for itself. In terms of your day-to-day regular bills, if they can be set up on Horat Keva, meaning automatic payment to the water company for city taxes, Arnona, for electricity, internet, etc. If that can be set up automatically, not directly to your bank account, but preferably to an Israeli credit card, because the cost of doing business is cheaper if you do it through an Israeli credit card in general than if you're setting up the automatic payments through your bank accounts. The credit card company doesn't charge for each payment. Then, with that in place, Moshe Jonas can conservatively invest the money in government bonds or in something slightly more speculative with parts of it, so that every month it will cover your costs of management. And every month he will be transferring a certain amount of money as per your needs automatically to your bank account to go and cover the Horat Keva, either at the bank or via your credit card. And finally, the most important part of this is that you can sleep at night. You can travel internationally now that that's starting to become available again. Should you be under the weather for a few weeks or whatever, everything is happening automatically. There's no default, no late payments. Everything works automatically by itself. So probably the cream on the cake is point number 6 at the bottom of the slide, which we're not seeing, which is that it costs almost nothing. And very often it really does cost nothing. So this is something we think is a backbone for people living in Israel so that they can live in peace, spend a lot less time on managing their money, and everything works automatically without giving up any rights as to complaining if a bill is incorrect or you want to make a change on anything. Okay, let's go on to the next page, page 3, and quickly talk about Israeli employee benefit programs. Uh, it's impossible for us to know exactly who's attending this now, so we don't know how many people are still working in Israel, will be working here at all. But I just thought it might be important for those of you who are still in the Israeli uh, uh, working system, that you know what some of the basic rules are. Basic to most any job in Israel is called, one gets an employment contract that spells out what your hours are, what you're expected to do, and how you're going to be paid, and what benefit programs you're signed up with. Before one does and then signs on an employment contract, it is more than worth the money to go to an Israeli labor attorney or a yoetz mas, a tax Israeli tax specialist, uh, to go over the contract and to suggest changes that will, at the end of the day, help you put more money into your pocket and make sure that you're not missing any benefits or perhaps negative effects based on the proposed labor contract. This is also extremely important when you're leaving employment. If you think you're going to leave, or you've already retired and haven't finalized how your benefits are going to be paid, it's important to go over it with an Israeli labor attorney or a yoetz mas to go and figure out what is the best bottom line for you. So this is something that people are not used to doing if they come from abroad, but this is essential for the Israeli system. The next point is that Israelis know how to game the system, how to figure out how to get the most benefit, particularly if they're in government jobs. And it's important to get to know your coworkers and to ask them how to go and get the most advantage out of your employer or your status. And you'll be amazed about how some people know how to play the game of being an employee so that they can live much better or get much higher retirement benefits than those of us who don't know the system inside out and don't see it as a game that we want to figure out every nook and cranny of the system. Finally, for those of you who are working here who are Americans, it's very important that you go over your benefits, Kupat Gimel, Karen Hishtalmiyot, and other benefits you might be getting with your American tax preparer. There are potential problems from the American law about PFICs, passive foreign investment companies, and WEP, which is a deduction on American Social Security if you're getting retirement benefits from abroad. So these are things that you should do your homework on. If you're an American in particular, you should do your homework anytime you're entering into a labor contract in general, and also do your homework as you're leaving an employer to make sure that the benefits that will be coming to you afterwards are maximized. Okay, let's go on to page 4. Here we're talking about Israeli banking and investing. One of the first things that most people talk about when it comes to banks in Israel is that they'll find a way to charge you for breathing once you walk into the bank. Costs are on everything. And there are ways to reduce your costs, especially if you consider using some of the smaller, lower cost banks. Personally, my favorite is Bank Yahav. It has close to 70 offices around the country. And if you are receiving a salary, you have no costs for doing business with them in terms of monthly fees. Similar bank is AACI. It's a subsidiary of the First International Bank. It also provides no-cost accounts if you are getting a salary deposited monthly into the bank. Other low-cost banks to use is Israel's premier internet bank. It's known as Pepper Bank. It's a subsidiary of Bank Leumi. And the bank that has the most offices around the country is the post office, the postal bank. Its fees are, there are fees, but they are lower than with the major banks. And they have access for depositing and doing business at any local post office, plus on the internet. If you're a person who has some significant wealth, you should look at the private banking arms of each of the 5 major banks, which are Hapoalim, Bank Leumi, Bank Discount, Mizrahi, and the First International Bank. Plus Bank Jerusalem, which is particularly set up to work with the wealthy and take care of many of their financial needs. Finally, in order to reduce investing costs, if you are doing brokerage type investing here in Israel, it is more efficient and lower cost if you're using the largest brokerage company in the country, which is Meitab Dash, or if you're doing it yourself, one of the online brokers. Later on, Moshe Jonas is going to be answering your questions, and I'm sure if you have any questions in the area of investing, he'll be happy to help you out. Just so you get some idea of what the investment scene looks like here, let's go on to page number 5. And if you can just put it down a little bit lower so we can see the top of the screen. There we go. What we've done here is taken the last 10 years of performance and comparing the Tel Aviv 35 index, which is the equivalent to the Dow Jones index in the United States, or the FTSE in England, and comparing it to the mid-cap index in Israel, the TA 125, and then comparing it to the London, the Europe, the Japan, China, and the S&P 500, the main American index. And you can see that Israel falls pretty much in the middle. In the last 10 years, Japan and the United States have done amazingly well, particularly in the last couple of years. But Israel is right in there in terms of its general stock market. Unfortunately, the stock market here has been dragged down by the biggest player in terms of listings, Teva. If it was not in these indices, you would see that the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange would perform much better. And then at the bottom of this page, we can see the same chart for the same indices, but for what has happened over the last year. And you can see that the Israeli Stock Exchange is a main player in the world. Given the size of our country, it has a lot more listings, a lot more is going on, and it is actually much better regulated than any of the major exchanges in the larger countries. Okay, can we go on to the next page now? Okay, so let's talk about real estate for a couple of minutes. when it comes to all the things related to real estate and anything else financial, there's a huge spectrum of possibilities here, and there are a lot of people who are selling schemes that probably won't work out as promised. That's why it's so important to know what you're doing and to work with reliable people. In terms of real estate, one of the most important things that we who don't have a lot of experience here need to know is that Israeli contract law is very different than it is in the United States, Canada, and many other countries. As a result, people should never negotiate a real estate deal on their own, because if they're putting numbers down on the back of an envelope, that could be proof in a court that you had made a contract. So the only way to do negotiations is to use a well-seasoned lawyer who acts as your negotiator, because he will protect you from having someone come back to you and say that you promised that you were going to close on a property or sell a property, even so nothing ever was put down in terms of a contract on paper. So whenever doing real estate in Israel, it is important that you have all your ducks lined up before you start looking seriously at properties. You should have your lawyer negotiator, you should have your mortgage lined up and your finances in place. Because typically in Israel, even in this past year, the market is hot. And from beginning to end of a real estate negotiation to final payment often is within 2 weeks. You don't have time to go out and start looking for a mortgage or to start figuring out how to bring in all the cash you need if you've already gotten seriously close to the end of a negotiation. So it's important to have your lawyer doing the negotiations, to have your mortgage pre-approved, and your finances available on short notice, because everything here goes extremely quickly. And if you're not prepared to do that, you can be held in breach, or you're going to lose the deal to someone else because the market is hot. Mortgages here are very different than they are in most other countries. They are typically stacked, meaning that if you have 100,000 shekel that you're borrowing, let's say 1 million shekel that you're borrowing, it might be 3, 4, 5 separate loans. Some are going to be for longer periods of time than others. Some will be at different types of interest or interest only for certain periods of time. It all will depend on what rights you have. So many Olim are able to get an Olel loan, which is part of the stack, and then they'll get private loans through one of the banks or an insurance company. And that's all put together with you by a lending officer, but it should be done with a private mortgage broker, because they can shop around and get a better deal for you and save you lots of money that more than makes up the cost for them doing the legwork, and depending on their expertise in knowing how to put it together. Our presenter this evening is probably the top English-speaking mortgage broker in the country. He has done lots of things to help make the mortgage system work better, and is constantly lobbying in the Knesset. Another surprise about mortgages is that they are portable. You get a mortgage today, own a property for 3 years, and decide to buy something else. That mortgage that you negotiated for the first property can be taken over to the next property, and possibly even add more layers to it if you are able to take out more cash on a new property. Many of us wind up having rental properties here in Israel. And there are lots of interesting rules about rentals, but you need to know that there are several different ways to report the rental income to Mas Haknasa, and it all depends on what works best for you, depending on how you're organized and how it's going to work out for you for taxation in Israel and abroad. This is something that you would want to discuss with your Yoetz Mas or even your tax preparer who does your taxes for the United States, Canada, or elsewhere. It's important to know that taxation on residential real estate is very different than if you own a commercial property. Also, if a residential property is rented out as an office for a certain amount of time, it becomes potentially commercial property, particularly when it's sold. So you need to know what you're doing. Commercial properties are taxed as businesses, while residential property are taxed in a much simpler form that doesn't involve nearly as much reporting. Okay, let's go on to the next page very quickly. Many of us feel very strongly that we should own real estate. And the Talmud actually talks about that. A third of our assets should be in real estate. So a few thoughts about that. First of all, renting in Israel is a better deal for, especially for older people. And what we mean about that is that today long-term rentals in Israel are becoming more common as companies are owning apartment buildings and renting out apartments as opposed to individual families who might be holding that piece of real estate for a shorter period of time or want to eventually have a child move into it. But more importantly, it's looking at numbers. One of the things that I mention very regularly when I'm talking to people about real estate is that if you tie up too much of your assets in real estate and we have a bad year like last year where you might not be able to rent it out or other things are happening and you have a cash crunch, you can't start selling windows and doors to pay the bills. So it might be more important to have cash available than to make sure that you own something in Israel, especially in your later years where you may be looking at other retirement possibilities. It's important to know that renting in Israel is financially a better deal than owning in Israel in the short term. And the reason for that is that rents compared to prices are much lower in Israel than they are in London, New York, or most other major cities or populated areas. The percent of a property's value that is typically paid by rents on an annual basis in Israel is around 3%. If you were in London and New York, it would be about 7 or 8% is the amount that rental real estate will provide as gross income in comparison to the sale price of that property. So as a result, renting here is relatively cheap compared to buying. Obviously, you don't have the advantage of the property going up in value, But if cash is tight after buying, then you can't really afford to buy, even if the real estate market is hot. Okay, there are many other ways to invest in real estate. There's group investing in real estate. In other words, a developer is going to put together an investment and needs some outside cash, which he can't raise at the bank, or he can raise more cheaply than at the bank. And as a result, he will invite investors to share with him the profits. That's a group project. These happen here in Israel. They have a much rockier record, although there's been some fine ones here, but they generally don't have the track record that you can find, particularly for group investing abroad, particularly in the United States, where the systems are much more mature. Finally, there's a way to invest in real estate via the stock market, and that's known as buying, instead of shares in a company, to buy interests or shares in a REIT, a real estate investment trust. A real estate investment trust is a company that owns real estate, often hundreds of properties, and is listing it on a stock exchange and providing regular income, dividends, and hopefully seeing the value of their shares go up in value. That is a good strategy in most places. Unfortunately, Israel only has one or two REITs in existence, and they haven't shown a strong track record so far. So finally, the last page, which hopefully all of you got. If you did not get it before the seminar, please send a message to us. And here, Leah, can you put up the next page? And here are contact details for myself and for the other people who work with me, including Yitzchak. And if you need any further help, or if you did not get the preparatory email for this evening's seminar, please let us know so that you will be able to get the follow-up mailing, which will come out in the next couple of days, which will be a lot more material than what we have shown you so far this evening. Okay, I'm done and ready for you to take over, Yitzchak.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. As usual, you're always very informative. And what's important for people to know is that you always send out more material in emails after our seminars than what you give in the seminars itself. So I'll let our people who are here know that you'll be sending out additional information in the next few days, Bezrat Hashem, a follow-up mailing for everybody. We'll provide contact details for everybody, and you're invited to be able to be in touch with each speaker afterwards as well. So we're going to get to that. So thank you very much, Mark. And again, I'll just mention, which I think we mentioned at the beginning, that the session is being recorded, and anybody who would like to get a copy of it, or those who'd like to send a copy to other people who you think it would be appropriate, we'll have a recording by the end of this week. We'll be sending you the link through Leah, and we'll be able to give you further information on that. Okay, so that's that. Also, the chat is open, so please, everybody now, we're going to be open to your questions, and we're going to put all your tremendous, difficult questions to our very distinguished speakers. So get ready to start chatting away, start typing away your information. So that we offer you, and we encourage you to be able to ask all your questions now. And I'll just let you know that whatever questions aren't answered tonight, I'll follow up with you and make sure that whatever questions you have for each of our speakers if it was Mark or whoever else it is, or for myself, I'll follow up with you directly and personally, and we'll be able to make sure that you get all your questions answered. So thank you very much, Mark. We're going to move on now just to say that I'll just tell you just very briefly in about a minute about myself that I'm a independent financial advisor, an IFA, and I'm currently an international client advocate with Capital Markets IQ. I'm a Canadian, but don't hold that against me. I graduated from McGill University, and I have a graduate degree from Yeshiva University in management. We made Aliyah close to 30 years ago, which is about 40 American years, I think, something like that. As we know that Eretz Yisrael Niknei B'Yisurin. Anyways, over the years, I've specialized in many different things, but my area of specialty is really an alternative to the stock and bond markets, to the volatility of the markets. So we're going to hear from many of our speakers, but those of you who would like to also hear about things that are alternative to the investment, to the stock and bond markets, so that's an area where I have some specialty in, and so we can speak more about that. So without further ado, I'd like to be able to introduce to our first speaker. I hope he's here at the moment. I haven't seen yet the listing of the participants. I want to introduce, and Moshe Jonas, if you'll be able to give yourself an introduction to our esteemed guests.
I see Moshe, but
Moshe is there? Is he here?
yeah, guys, the screen that says bent.
Maybe Moshe is busy doing other business while we're meeting. I don't know.
I'm here.
Moshe, welcome to our program. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I've been all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moshe.
Yes. Okay. My name is Moshe Jonas, and now I'm sitting at home in Salkiot in Jerusalem. But usually I'm in business hours. I'm in our office in Hillel Street in Jerusalem, and I'm an asset manager, which means that we manage our clients' accounts in terms of investments according to their personal situation, willingness or aversion to risk, need for income, age, profession, whatever. I mean, we get a very good picture of the client, what he or she needs and wants, and often after 40 years in this business, it's not always the same thing, because after these many years, you get a experience that what people say is not always what they really need and want. So we try, and I think succeed getting a good picture of the client, and then we invest the money according to what the client needs and wants. And as Mark said, we have very many clients who use that investment account for additional income if they need that, meaning that they have a monthly transfer from the investment account into their check account to cover their monthly expenses. And we can easily set that up, and each one gets the amount he or she needs at the date they wish, without any hassle or any need to do anything. And we invest the money in stocks and bonds in Israel, diversify quite a lot in Israel, abroad, United States, Europe, Asia, and different currencies and different types of investments, again, according to the client's personal needs and wishes. Now, there are some points which are important to know, especially if you're American. Americans, there are limitations for what Americans can or should do in terms of investment out of the United States. And as it is today, and some of you might have seen that and felt that the American brokers and banks will not even keep your money in their account in the United States if you don't live there anymore permanently. We've seen many clients who've been told not to nicely, to the moment they move to Israel, please take your money with you. The same is the case for people coming from the United Kingdom. They are told you can't keep your money in the bank in the United Kingdom anymore for tax and other reasons. So, but there are things you're still limited to do in a bank with an Israeli bank or broker. And one of the problems is that the banks or the brokers are not always aware of that, or if they're aware of it, they couldn't bother to take care of it. For example, an American should not, it's not illegal, but you should definitely not invest money in a non-American mutual fund. And that is what you would do if you go to your local bank, what most people do, and ask for investment advice. That's what most people do today in Israel. They go to their local bank where they know the people and the people know them, and they're probably old and good clients, and they want to get advice. What do I do with 1,000, 100,000, 10,000, 1 million shekels I have sitting and I need to invest? And in 99% of the cases, it will tell you buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mutual funds. But again, Americans shouldn't do that. And if the advisor in the bank is aware of that Americans shouldn't do it, they would just ignore it because they have no other alternative to offer you. That's more or less the case. Now, the problem today is also that many of the banks had shut down their advisory offices in the local branches, which means that today, with the big banks, you cannot do investment in your local branch, but you will have to go to one of the major branches, which is of course further away. And until not long ago, that was more or less impossible because you couldn't go and you couldn't get in and you had to make an appointment. Today, of course, it's a little easier, but still for many people, it's not attractive to go to some branches where nobody knows who they are. So that's another reason to go to somebody who will do the job for you and invest the money for you. Because again, the bank, if you get some professional and good advice in the bank, then you have to keep on top of things. You have to follow the investments. And you're probably aware that the markets can be and has been and will be volatile, which means that you have to follow what's going on, perhaps not by the daily basis, but at least once a week or at least once a month. You have to follow what's happening in the markets and how your portfolio is doing, and figure out if you need to make any changes. Again, then you would have to go to this central bank branch of the bank and hopefully get some professional advice. But with an asset manager like us, and I'm not the only one, I mean, you could find others. There are around 90 to 100 companies like mine in Israel. But again, from my experience and knowledge, and I've been in this business many years, and I'm a member of the board of the Asset Managers Organization, actually few of them have any knowledge or experience giving services to American persons, again, taking into consideration the regulations and limits which concerns Americans. And also many of them are not able to give service, for example, in English or send reports in English. We do all that. Mark.
Yes, Yitzchak, let's continue.
Yitzchak.
Okay, I guess I'll
No, that's fine. So Mark, do you want to answer that? Or we
No.
have other
I-
other chats questions that have come up. If you want, we can go with that.
why don't we get everyone else introduced?
Get everybody else, meaning our speakers, or to go to
Right.
some of the chats? Okay,
Our speaker.
the next speaker. Okay, Beseder, Moshe, first of all, thank you very much for your participation. Our next esteemed and distinguished speaker is Moshe Wilshinsky. If you'd like to join us. And then we'll get to your questions. By the way, those of you who have questions, please keep chatting and we'll get to all of your questions, Bezrat Hashem. Moshe.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I could personally testify at least two of the panelists I've known not for years, but for decades. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here tonight. The mortgage industry in Israel, unlike everybody else speaking here, is actually the youngest industry per se, because many financial industries go back many, many years, because there was a society here, even when the country was had a socialist economy, a lot of these industries still existed. The mortgage industry, the banks only started lending their own money post 1990. Before that, it was all government money. Ironically, since then, the government benefits haven't changed that much, especially in the amount. So today, where it used to be in 1990, it was probably 60+% government benefits and the balance from the private banks. Today, it's very low single digits are government benefits and the rest are from private banks. And I think the takeaway from tonight's session vis-a-vis mortgages is you have to think about mortgages sort of the inverse that everybody else is talking about. Everybody else is talking about how you maintain and preserve your assets and generate income. The mortgages are basically how you either leverage assets you have, the real estate, or when you want to buy. So as Mark mentioned, unlike anywhere in North America or England, you can get a mortgage here with multiple tranches, multiple parts. And that lends a lot of flexibility. One of the unique things that is actually illegal for Americans, it's not legal to tie a mortgage and age together. Canadians, it is less common. Those that are from the UK market are used to it because that's where Israel adopted it from. But you have to realize that your amortization is limited by your age. So you take 80, subtract your age from 80, and what you're left with is the maximum period of amortization, how long the loan can be. And amortization basically means they divide the loan principal and interest evenly over that period. Now, the good news is now more than ever before, there are more products on the market for people over 70 years old. And these are referred to as reverse mortgages. And that's a name that was sort of adopted from an old product in the US because people, when they reach a certain age, they're asset rich and cash poor. And so they use the asset, usually their home, that very often they had free and clear, as a way to get a monthly payment. So that's why it's reverse, because a normal mortgage, you get a big chunk of money up front and then you make monthly payments. The reverse mortgage, you didn't make any payments. You basically gave the bank a lien on your loan or the lender a lien on your loan, and you got a monthly stipend. So in Israel, there are 4 different bodies that are out, both banks and insurance companies that are giving these types of loans. A little bit about myself. I've actually been in the mortgage industry longer than the mortgage market here has existed. I started in 1985 in Los Angeles and then started here in Israel in the early 90s. And if any of you have any questions, by nature, these things are usually very particular, for your situation, your age, your income, et cetera, either purchasing for yourself or for a child or grandchild, or if you have a piece of property here that you want to pull some liquidity out of to invest it with, anybody on the call tonight, please feel free to reach out to me and discuss your particulars. There was one question about interest only. Interest only in Israel is rare except in two cases. One, as I mentioned, when the borrower's over a certain age and the quote unquote, the reverse mortgages make sense for them. That's one case. Keep in mind, those mortgages are at a little higher interest rate than the general mortgage market. The other possibility is when it's referred to as a bridge loan, meaning there's some liquidity event so that after 3 years, they can see you're selling a property, whatever, you're going to be able to pay off the loan. That's the other example where you can get an interest only without an issue. Otherwise, you're talking about you can get 1 or 2 years if there's a clear reason, right? But that's 1 or 2 years of a 15 or 20-year mortgage.
Okay, very good. Moshe, thank you very much. There are some chat questions coming, but we're going to hold those questions until the end. We're going to introduce the next speaker, and then we'll get to all of your chat questions. So hopefully Moshe, Jonas, and Moshe Wilshinsky, Mark, and Jonathan Marcus, who we're going to introduce now, will stay with us, and hopefully we'll be able to answer everybody's questions. And those that we can't get to tonight, please know that we'll get to every question. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, our next speaker, I hope he's here. We introduce Jonathan Marcus. We welcome you to our AACI Financial Resource Network
Hi.
Zoom seminar.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Jonathan Marcus. I'm an insurance broker. I've been in Israel for 43 years. I've been in insurance for 30 years, including being in charge of the insurance department of the JNF for about 10 years. And for the last 22 years, I've been a private insurance broker. Insurance works differently here than in other countries. Just give you one or two examples. For instance, motor insurance. Unlike in the States, where within your car insurance, you can insure things like, if you rent a car, you can insure that part of your activity. Here you can't. If we're talking about life insurance, there is no whole of life insurance here in Israel. There's only term life insurance. And the other area, of course, is private health insurance, which I personally believe to be far stronger here than in most other countries, basically because it's more tightly regulated, which means that the government doesn't allow the insurance companies here to get away with the kind of nonsense they get away with, particularly in the States. And also, private health insurance is, relative to American prices anyway, very inexpensive. You're talking about as much as 50 or even 70% less expensive than in the States. I also deal with pensions, with Kupot Gemel, with savings and so on. Again, within the limitations that the American citizens have. I'm very, very careful about this. I warn them and say, before we do anything, get your accountant or tax advisor or whoever to go over it to make sure that you're not going to fall into the PPIC trap. Likewise, with the WEP issue, I just this week dealt with somebody who had this question, and we came to the conclusion that it may be worth his while cashing in his pension savings here in Israel, paying the 35% source tax that you pay on the entire assets, and thereby not running into the issue of getting charged. In this guy's case, he was going to get charged. His Social Security payments were going to be reduced by $700 a month for him, and for his wife, $250, whereas his pension here in Israel was only going to be 1,500 shekels anyway. So I always take that into account. An important aspect of the way I work is that I'm a certified financial planner, which means that I use insurance as a way of stabilizing the financial situation, trying to cater for any accidents that can happen along the way, to make sure that the client's finances will keep on running and keep on providing for him, even though, God forbid, somebody dies, somebody becomes ill, or whatever, to make sure these areas are covered. It's important when looking, for example, at private health insurance, to decide what you actually need. The plans here are modular. You don't need to take everything. If you decide that you're only interested in surgery abroad, transplants abroad, and medications which are not funded by the Israeli government, we can do a policy that just does that, or a far more extensive policy with a number of other modules, basically in terms of what you think you require in terms of your budget and so on. Unlike the old policies where you took on a whole load of coverages which you were never going to use and were paying for them anyway. It doesn't work like that anymore. In terms of long-term care insurance, COD insurance, private COD insurance does not exist here in Israel as of the last 2 years. The insurance companies have stopped selling it completely, basically because the reinsurers abroad came to the conclusion that they just can't get their actuarial sums to make sense anymore, because people are living longer and the cost of long-term care is spiraling up all the time. It's now become basically impossible to insure it here in Israel. The only long-term care insurance here in Israel is provided by the Kupot Cholim under their supplemental insurance plans, the Klalit Mushlam, Meuchedet C or Adif, the Migdal Zahav or Sheli, and the Leumit, I can't remember the name of their private plan. So, if you're looking for long-term care insurance, unfortunately, I'm unable to help you with that. I also go through existing insurance portfolios to make sure that you're paying what you should be paying, that your coverages are correct for you. For example, if I find somebody who's still paying for term life insurance and they're in their 60s and their kids are already grown up, I can find better things to do with the money than term life insurance, unless there are other financial reasons. It may be that the person has a lot of debt that they want to pay off when, God forbid, they die. We also provide mortgage and life insurance, which is required by the mortgage banks in most cases. Moshe Wilshinsky, I'm sure, knows about that. Again, I broker the policies, all of my policies, between a number of insurance companies to make sure you get the best deal. That's basically, if you have any questions about the insurance, if you need any help with your existing portfolio, please don't hesitate to contact me. My contact details are on the paper, the page that you would have got with the email.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, Jonathan, Marcus, thank you very much. And to Moshe Wilshinsky, Moshe Jonas, and Mark van Gelderen. So we're going to now open it up to all our distinguished listeners, participants, to your questions. I'm going to start with some of the questions, but please feel free. It's interesting, some of the other seminars that we've had, questions were coming in fast and furious. Tonight, it's less, even though tonight we set it up as being question and answer. So maybe we should say that you can't ask any questions, and maybe hopefully we'll get more questions. But anyways, one of the questions that came up, so please all of you stay around. One of the questions that came up is Ricky Lieberman asked everybody, who's writing interest-only loans for refinancing? At what interest rate approximately?
So I'd mentioned that there's only a couple of times you can get an interest-only loan here. One is if it's a bridge loan. So if it's a set, usually 3 years, and the lender can see that there's a liquidity event that's going to be paying it off, that's a time where an interest-only loan, in other words, the entire term of the loan is interest only, is sort of standard product. The other possibility is if the borrower is over a certain age, the reverse mortgage products all have that. They both have an interest only option and a total deferral option. Again, they're a little more expensive, but the type of interest only, or what they call in the States, IO loans that you can get in America, where you can get, a 10-year loan that's interest only. Israel used to have them, they do not have them anymore.
Okay, Ricky, I hope that answered your question. Gabor asked a question about alternative investments, and I know I've been in touch with Gabor, so perhaps we can also follow up together personally and individually, and not necessarily on the Zoom, but basically we're talking about things that are in real estate investment, things that are not correlated to the volatility of the stock and bond markets, things like student housing, like commercial or retail office space, things like that you can invest in, things that are alternative to the stock and bond markets. If you have more questions, I can follow up with you. Another question came from Gary. He says, what do I have to do in terms of, I have in place at my Israeli bank, what do I have to do before transferring funds from my US account? Or do I just transfer money in and then I'll worry about it later? What do I need to do with the banks beforehand, or should I just send money over? If transferring funds received from Social Security, do I have to prove it? What do I have to do? That's a question from Gary for whoever wants to take that one.
I think I can answer that one.
Okay.
Okay, there's two things. If a person is getting Social Security, an old age pension from abroad, generally it can be deposited directly into an Israeli bank. Specifically for American Social Security, they've made arrangements with, I believe, 3 of the Israeli banks. I know Bank Leumi is one of them. I'm not sure what the other ones are. The AACI has counselors on staff who can help you with that. And they can show you how it can be deposited directly. And then you would probably change it into local currency at the bank here. There is a better way for bringing money across borders, particularly if it's larger amounts. We're generally talking about $5,000 up to $5 million. And that is that there is a new industry out there. It's called transfer agencies. In Israel, there's one associated with the AACI called ISRA Transfer. There's another one, I believe, that's called Olepe, and there are a series of them in London, one that we have a bit of an affiliation with called Currencies Direct, and I'll try to send you information on the follow-up email on all of these. And these are companies that reduce the amount of paperwork that's needed to transfer money in, because they're not actually bringing the money into the country. What these companies are doing, like IsraPay, they have in the United States a bank account where you send your money to that bank account if it's US dollars. And once it hits that bank account in the United States, they contact IsraPay here in Israel, and IsraPay pays out on the Israeli side from a shekel account directly into your bank. And as a result, technically, there is no money crossing borders. And because they're doing this in both directions all the time, their exchange rates are generally much lower than at the banks. So for larger transactions, particularly real estate transactions, you want to use a transfer agent, not a bank, for moving money across borders.
Okay, very good. I hope that answered your questions, Gary. We have only one more question, but we still have more time. So if there are other questions that people want to ask, now's your time. It's free.
I have some questions that I'll be able to send to the speaker.
Okay, let me just answer the other one that came in from Yitzchak Becker. Is there a problem for Canadians, he asks, to invest in Israeli mutual funds?
If Moshe is not there, the answer is there's no problem.
I'm here.
Okay.
To the best of my information, Yitzchak,
Yeah,
there is no
no
problem.
problem.
To the best of my information, and I haven't heard that there would be a problem. Yeah, that's answer.
Okay.
I think.
So Yitzchak Becker, bring your money, put it in, and invest it in mutual funds, among other things. Okay, those are all the questions that we've so far gotten from the chat. Unless there's other questions, Mark, you want to address?
Well, I'd like to just add a couple of insurance things for Jonathan to respond to. I think there is an area of insurance that just about everyone on this Zoom today needs to know about and is anxious to find out, because the parameters have changed so much over the last 15 months. Tell us about travel insurance, Jonathan. No, Jonathan's not connected. Got to turn him on.
Okay, I'm with you.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have another issue that you want to talk about? You want me to talk about?
We'll talk about health insurance after that, but first tell
Okay,
people
fine.
what
Okay,
they can
regarding
do
travel
if they
insurance,
start
travel
traveling.
insurance is now back in town after nearly a year when there was literally no travel insurance available at all because of the corona thing. It's now back. All of the companies are offering plans which take into account the fact that you could, 2 days before your trip, suddenly, God forbid, go down with corona, or you need to be in bidud, or whatever. Likewise, you're abroad and you can't get back in time because you need to be in bidud because you've caught corona there, and so on. All of the plans require adults to be fully vaccinated before you can be insured, which means that kids under 16 who at the moment cannot be vaccinated are able to travel. They just need to do a corona test 72 hours before they go away. Apart from that, the coverages are about the same as they always were. Travel insurance has become more expensive, particularly to the States. Although I guess now that they're getting the vaccinations moving, hopefully the prices will start to come down when they find that the rates of people becoming sick start going down in the States as well because of the vaccinations. But the companies are all basically back in action and raring to go. I work with two different companies, both of whom offer very, very good plans. They're more limited in time than in the past. You used to be able to take it out for a year and so on and so forth. Now it's for one of the companies now is offering up to 140 days. One of the companies offers only up to 90 days, and so on. And it's become a little more complicated. The underwriting has become more difficult. What used to be more or less automatic, they start asking more questions, which is understandable because the COVID thing has basically thrown everything into disarray. But now that the world is beginning to manage it more or less sensibly, at least in some countries, particularly Israel.
Can you give us some idea of how much it costs?
I did a plan for a kid of, I think he's only 18. And for a couple of weeks in the States, it cost something like about $180. So it's quite expensive.
You're talking about $10 or $15 a day?
Yeah, it's becoming. No. Hold on, sorry. We're talking. Sorry, No, it's 180 shekels. I'm sorry. Okay. For kids, it's about $3 a day. For grown-ups up to age around about 60, it's about $5 a day, and then going past 60, and then it starts to really skyrocket. But it's what it is. That's the way the industry is at the moment. Regarding health insurance,
Yes, I think many people don't understand what the difference is between the insurance that they're required to have and the insurance that you have. So maybe you can explain how one is stacked on top of the other.
A quick rundown. Basically, health insurance here in Israel, there are 3 levels. You've got your basic Kupat Cholim, which you're required by law to take out, and the Kupat Cholim are required to take you on regardless of your existing state of health. In other words, people of age 90 who've been graduates of Siberia and are falling apart physically are required to be covered by the Kupat Cholim. The Kupat Cholim suddenly came into their own with the vaccination campaign here and proved to be extremely efficient after being basically the butt of many cruel jokes over the years. But they suddenly came into their own. Public medicine here works better than in most other countries. The doctors managed to extract more medical care out of each dollar of budget, out of each budget dollar than in most other countries. They won't let you die, and they won't kick you out because your insurance has run out or anything like that, and kick you out in the middle of treatment or anything like that. But it has the problems of public medicine worldwide. First of all, it's grossly underfunded. We're talking in terms of needing another 10 or 15 billion shekels to get the health system up to where it needs to be. But since they're wasting 2 billion shekels every 6 months on the elections here, they haven't got any money for the health system. The second level up is the supplemental medical plans which are provided by the Kupot Cholim, which I mentioned before in my earlier presentation. That gives you access to a certain level of private medicine. In other words, if you need elective surgery, you can have it done privately using the Kupat Cholim. The Kupat Cholim pays a percentage of the cost of the private surgery. And in fact, you don't know. In other words, if you need a hip replacement today, the Kupat Cholim may cover 30% this month. If you need it in a month's time, they may cover 60%, and so on. There's a level of instability. If, God forbid, you need organ transplant, if you find an organ here in Israel, then it's covered by the Kupat Cholim. You don't need insurance for that. But if you need to go abroad, and that in the majority of cases, people end up going abroad because of the low level of organ donation here in Israel, then the Kupat Cholim provide you with a level of coverage about $250,000 to $300,000. But 2 conditions both need to apply. One is that you are in immediate danger of losing your life if you don't have the transplant, which means you're not in fact a good candidate. And secondly, the government here, the Ministry of Health here, also has to agree to fund part of the cost of the surgery abroad. The third area, which is not covered at all by the Kupat Cholim to any great extent, is medications which are not budgeted for by the government. Usually, a new medication which is approved by the FDA, it takes around about 8 years on average for the Israeli government to start budgeting for it. And these medications are incredibly expensive, but incredibly effective. So this is, and that basically this, the Kupat Cholim plan, they cover all sorts of other things. They cover dental care and glasses, and physiotherapy, and a whole list of other things that they cover. It cuts down the waiting time of surgery somewhat. obviously you get more access to private surgery as long as you use a doctor who works with the Kupat Cholim. You can't choose any doctor you want. This is not a major limitation because most of the main doctors do in fact work with the Kupat Cholim. The next level up is the private medical insurance, which is basically what I sell. And this basically, the way I structure it for my clients is to fill in the gaps in the Kupat Cholim coverage and the public coverage, and offer various other additional things. For example, if it's elective surgery, I have a plan where you have a choice of either the insurance company covering the part of the cost which is not covered by the Kupat Cholim, in other words, your copay. So if the Kupat Cholim is covering 30%, the insurance will cover the other 70%. Or alternatively, if you don't want to go through all that balagan, a plan which gives you, you pay a $3,000 copay regardless of the cost of the surgery, and you're on your way. You are required by the insurance company to use a doctor who works with them, but their lists of doctors are longer, and doctors that work with both the Kupat Cholim and the insurance company prefer to work with the insurance company because the insurance companies pay more than the Kupat Cholim do, which means you'll probably get the surgery done faster. If it's in terms of transplants abroad, the private plans cover the entire cost of the transplant, including the flight, including hospitalization prior to the surgery of transplant surgery. For example, a liver can't live outside the body for more than a few hours, which means there's no point in calling you here to Israel, and it's going to take you 24 hours to fly to wherever you need to get to have the transplant. So you need to be hospitalized prior to. Covers all the costs. Okay. In terms of medications not included in the Salabiyot, which are not funded by the government, one of the plans I offer gives you 1 million shekels a year to cover these medications until you either get better or the insurance company, the government decides to start funding. And the plans also include all sorts of other areas like ambulatory surgery, like ambulatory medical coverages, which are basically outpatient areas like extra physiotherapy, fertility treatments, various, a whole list of things which are covered, and various other items. I won't go into too much detail. Regarding the question, the Maccabi question, if I'm correct, the question was that the doctors don't give you enough time, and therefore are the internet online medical services better? To be absolutely honest with you, I don't have any really detailed information about how the online medical services work. I don't know if they're limited in time. They're basically, most of the online services are designed for times when the Kupat Cholim is closed, for example, on Shabbat or 12 o'clock at night or whatever. But on the other hand, they do give you access to private consultants. It takes a day or so to organize a private consultant. It's not immediate. They even offer you consultants a second opinion abroad. They offer you a service whereby somebody can read your MRIs, your CT reports and pictures and so on. The Kupat Cholim doctors are very pressed for time. You sometimes get doctors who are very nice and they'll talk to you and won't talk to the computer. Other times it can be very, very difficult.
Okay. Yitzchak, do you have some questions?
Yeah, there's a few more. We have many more. Okay, so first of all, Sally Esakov asked, are existing CUD accounts still valid? She said, I established one in 2013. In addition to my Maccabi account, I'm still paying into it.
What was the second time apart from the Maccabi account?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question exactly. I established a CUD account in addition to my Maccabi
okay.
CUD account. I'm still paying into it.
you should carry on paying into it. There are no, the COD policy that you have will pay out if, God forbid, you need a long-term care. Okay, the insurance policies here are based on a contract between yourself and the insurance company, and they are required to pay out, regardless of whether they got their actuarial sums wrong. At some point, it's their problem. They need to continue paying out. You're also probably paying a fixed premium, which is not going up with age. So just keep it going. There is no other valid, viable alternative at the moment. And since round about getting on for 25% of people will be in need of long-term care at some point in their lives, it would be dangerous to get rid of the plan unless you're strapped for money. Also, you should know that you can actually stop paying the premium and still be covered for part of the original amount that you bought. If, for example, you bought coverage of 10,000 shekels a month, for example, if you've been in the plan for say 7 or 8 years, you may be able to carry on being insured for about a third of that amount without continuing to pay the premium. But if you can manage to keep up the premiums, keep going.
Keep going.
Don't get rid of it.
Keep going. Okay, Sally, I think that answers your question. She gives you a thumbs up.
Okay.
So I think that answers that.
Okay.
Okay, Ricky Lieberman asks, could you please compare the transaction fees for Forex, the AACI group, and the bank? The different transaction fees.
I guess that's for me. I'm not involved in that business, but these transfer agents like Isra Transfer have become very, very popular. And it's because not only is the paperwork simpler, but the costs are lower. How much lower, I can't tell you. I'm not involved with it.
Okay, very good. Hope that answers Ricky's questions. David Wilshinsky asks, what about mutual funds in Israel for U.S. citizens?
Moshe, you want to answer that?
I can't see the on this. I'm looking at the chats.
He asks about mutual funds or mutual duns in Israel for U.S. citizens.
There are none. I mean, as I said before, it's not illegal, but for many reasons, I'm not going to get into the details, tax reasons and others, an American person, and I say person because it's not necessarily a citizen, should not buy non-American, it's not only Israeli, he shouldn't buy British or French or any other mutual funds because he will have a lot of tax problems and expenses and hassle and the accountant fees. So there are not, I mean, an American person can, though he can buy American funds or ETFs in his local bank or broker. That's no problem. But there are no funds in local mutual funds or ETFs made specifically for Americans. So if you want to invest in a mutual fund or an ETF, you have to buy an American one. And actually, there are American ETFs which invest in the Israeli stock market. So it's a way to get around it, but it's probably, I don't know these funds particularly, so I'm not going to give advice if they are good and who manage, I don't know anything. But that's the answer.
Very good. Okay. We have just one more question. We're almost near the end. Halan asks, I've kept my German Allianz private medical insurance. It also includes travel insurance. Can I forget about the Israeli one?
Well, I'm obviously I'm not familiar with the policy that you have with Allianz, and if it's in German, I won't be able to read it anyway because I don't read German. So, you know, I need to know what exactly it covers, how much you're paying for it, in order to answer that. It may be that you're paying a very reasonable amount for excellent coverage, and they're quite happy with you having surgery here in Israel and whatever, and they'll cover it. It may be perfectly no good reason for taking out a private plan. Regardless of the Kupat Cholim thing, in any case, you're required to have the regular Kupat Cholim. The supplemental plans are relatively inexpensive, and you know, it may be more convenient logistically using your Kupat Cholim supplemental plan rather than your Allianz German plan in terms of the paperwork and whatever. I mean, I don't know how the plan works, and I need to discuss it with you in more detail. If you want to discuss it with them, then fine.
Okay, so a lot of these questions we need to follow up with people individually. So I'll just suggest to all our participants, and Baruch Hashem, we have a tremendous amount of people that participated again in this, this AACI Zoom seminar. So we will follow up with each and every one of you, all of the participants. We thank Mark van Gelderen, of course, and Moshe Jonas, and Moshe Wilshinsky, and Jonathan Marcus, and everybody else who participated tonight. We will be sending out further emails to you, information, and if you have more questions, we'll answer them all. I will call each and every one of you individually and make sure you get all your questions answered. And we look forward to our next seminar. We thank you very much for joining us tonight. We wish you all a good night, and thank you for joining us at the AACI seminar.
Thank you very
All
much.
right.
Thank you,
Good
Mark.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Speaking to
Mark.
you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.